Rambo.
Cubby leader calling Raven. Come in, Raven.
Taking a look at another Rambo figure. Earlier this week, we looked at the original Rambo from Coleco's Force of Freedom line, 1985. And today we're taking a look at the 2015 San Diego Comic-Con exclusive Rambo by NECA. NECA. Two different ways of pronouncing it, I guess. I always call it NECA. And this packaging is a direct homage to the original Rambo figure from Coleco. So not only is the packaging designed to look identical to the original packaging, another thing that they both have in common is that they can't stand on their own. Usually NECA figures aren't too bad, and McFarlane and other movie accurate, more realistic looking collector style toys. These packages can usually stand on their own, but this guy doesn't really want to. And then the original Rambo doesn't either, because these were never meant to be displayed. They were just meant to be hung on the peg at the store until the kids brought them home and ripped them open. But through the magic of sticky tack, and just for this review, we can prop them both up to get a better look at them both. So I really like that they decided to do the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive as a direct homage to the Force of Freedom line. Now the artwork isn't exactly the same, so that's probably a rights issue. There's always these issues with who created the original artwork. Sometimes it's just as easy as reusing the original artwork, and sometimes they have to redo it as close as they can get it. I know with the G.I. Joe figures, they just didn't have a lot of the original artwork, so they had to recreate it as best as they could. But here's a little comparison of the two. So it's not an exact match, but it's really, really, really close. And another thing, I'm noticing little details now. This is one of my favorite parts of doing these videos. Sometimes I don't just sit down and really go through this stuff when I first get it. It's in doing the reviews that I notice these little details. So the original one in the bottom corner said, "Brave, daring, heroic, no man can stop him." And they've recreated that right there in the bottom corner. So it's got the original Force of Freedom logo up top as well. So it's cool that they were able to actually get the original logo instead of, it'd be not as cool if they did like an homage to it. If it was some other bird and some other, term, some other made up faction name. I love that they were actually able to get that. And that's another cool thing about being a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, that sometimes they're able to circumvent certain rights issues and do a limited run of stuff, just particularly for the fans. That happened with Sergeant Slaughter a few years ago. Slaughter's rights are with Mattel right now to do wrestling figures, so that's why you can't see an official Sergeant Slaughter G.I. Joe figure, but the San Diego Comic-Con Sergeant Slaughter exclusive, they were able to do a short run of Sarge G.I. Joe figures. And on the back, we've got another direct homage to the original figure. So they had a picture of the Rambo figure here, and there's the NECA figure. And I believe this is the exact same text that I read in the Coleco Rambo figure. And then they've got the pictures of the other NECA Rambo figures available on the back here too. So cool little touches. That's all part of the time travel. All these little memories locked away in your brain. So I really like that they even were able to recreate. Now this is a different type of material, this paper. It's a little thicker. It's a little shinier. But they try to recreate this old feel. This almost feels like recycled paper on here. And when it was brand new, I don't think it was in much better condition than this. It's And I thought it was always fitting for the Rambo toys, since Rambo is down and gritty. So I like that they kind of tried to give this that worn out, faded look as much as they could. But it's the front of the package that I like the most. I just love that they were able to use that flaming effect in behind, the explosion effect. And you see Rambo with his RPG, even though this particular one doesn't come with an RPG. It's cool that they didn't do something cheesy and take out the RPG and put in his gun or his bow and arrow. So that's a cool little treat, especially for people who had the original Rambo, wish they could have a mint on card version again, and it's just not in the budget. So this is a really a nice substitute. So now let's take a look at Rambo out of the package. Okay, I decided to put an edit in there because I want to keep this PG and not a hard R like the new Rambo movie, and spare you hardcore collectors the horror of seeing action figure opened up. But here's the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive Rambo figure, and he's like most other NECA figures, McFarlane figures, very movie accurate, more of a display piece than a toy you play with. And we're just going to go through the sculpt first before we get to the accessories. He's got a really nice material for his upper body. I've never seen anything like this before on an action figure. It's almost translucent. Like it's not, but it almost feels as though light is just kind of almost barely passing through this, which gives it a really eerily realistic look to it, because our skin is sort of translucent. We can sort of see certain things going on under there, and the same thing is going on with Rambo here. It's really wild, and the paint job is uncanny. Like the shading, he's kind of grimy, kind of dirty. The real amazing thing about this Rambo sculpt is the attention to detail in his scarring. So here's the scar that he got in First Blood on his arm. It's a really big gash, and it can sometimes be missed because it's part of the whole musculature here, but it's definitely in there. And then the chest scars, just brutal. And they're actually colored a different color from the rest of the skin, just like in First Blood Part 2. So even though this is an homage to the Coleco Rambo, which was from the cartoon Force of Freedom, this is actually the First Blood Part 2 Rambo with a few tweaks. And I'll have the original version of this figure a bit later on to compare the differences. He's got abs because he does his crunches, and just scars all over this guy. What has this guy been into? I feel like one of the cops in First Blood. He's got the backlashes, which the Coleco figure didn't have. And I don't know, man, there's just something about backlashes that make a figure just seem a lot more intense, just brutal. Like, man, they spared no detail on this guy. And he's got the black pants from First Blood Part 2, because I mentioned in the Coleco Rambo figure, I wasn't sure he was wearing green pants in that movie. So cargo pants and nice combat boots. And the head sculpt is different from the original version of this figure, the retail version, because he's got a big snarl on his face. And he's also got the pendant, which is green. It's colored jade. It's close to being blue, but just like he had in the movie. In terms of articulation, he's got a ton of it, but like most NECA figures, just because he's got an articulation point doesn't necessarily mean he's got a lot of range. in that articulation point. So his head looks left and right. So you would think, oh, he's got great head articulation. Not quite, because his hair gets in the way. So he also has up and down, but not quite, because his hair is stopping him from being able to look up. I do like his posture, though. He's got this leaned forward style of posture, just making him look a lot more feral, more like a hunter, instead of chest out. Elbow or bend, a bit. He's got a bit of an elbow bend. Again, like that's it. That's the range. And one thing I really do like about the NECA figures these days is they're made of a softer material. So you can see I'm moving his hand here a little bit, his fingers. The hand is popping off without the peg breaking. It's nice they have a little more give, because I had some NECA figures when they first started doing these movie figures, and they were breaking on me left and right from minimal movement. Falling off a shelf meant an arm would break off, a leg would break off. So this is much better for something that people want to move around, change the pose of. A plastic that has a little more give in it. So the elbow, even though it doesn't go up and down very much, he does have swivel arm. Look at that, just like a G.I. Joe. That's cool. Shoulder has a little bit of range again. That's about it. Might be able to get it more than that, but if you run the risk of breaking him. And then the arm can do a 360. It's pretty tight though. It's really rubbing up on itself. And it kind of feels like a Centurion to me, in that if you can do a full rotation, that doesn't necessarily mean you can do that over and over again. You might be actually causing some damage in there and having that pop off. And the wrists can do a full 360, and because the peg is a little bit loose, you can sort of have a little bit of up and down wrist tilt, which is really helpful for the guns when he's trying to hold a gun. And then on the feet, this is really awesome. These tilting ankles are really nice. So when you're posing a figure on the ground, if these didn't tilt, then you'd kind of have like those original Transformers feet where they're sitting on an angle, but because they tilt, you can actually get a really nice wide stance, and it's actually really, really sturdy. So that's an important part of keeping the figure stable so that he doesn't fall and break over. And then he's got a foot that comes off very easily. So let's pop that back on. And it stays pretty secure. The knee bends a bit. And he has full rotation in the knee too. So if he had a little bit more range in his hips, he'd be able to do nice kneeling poses because of all of the range in the knees. The hips, can he do splits? It's kind of weird. This leg, one of the issues with this particular figure that I have is that this rubber material keeps bunching up and tucking in. And I got to use a screwdriver to pull it back out. Doesn't seem to be doing it on the other side though, so for some reason it's... Look at that. I'm not sure why. I can get this leg to go like that on one side, and he's stiff. He's doing it. He's kind of stiff, but so in order to give him a little more range, they've given him kind of these rubber shorts, rubber underwear, covering the lower waist of the figure, which is cool in theory, and it does let you get a little bit more range. But I don't know. It's with the bunching up there and with this type of rubber material constantly moving and being bent and folded. I just think that that's something over the years that's going to start to act like any other rubber that you move around and bend around a lot. It's going to start to split. I don't think NECA figures are built for the long run anyway, so that's something you can probably not look forward to, but expect happening if you tend to move your NECA figures around a lot. So let's talk about the accessories now. He's got a sheath that's been glued to the side of his belt, so it doesn't have a removable belt like the original Rambo did. But inside, he's got the knife. And look at her gleam. It's beautiful. Nice silver paint job on it, and very easily fits into the hand. Gotta have a knife with Rambo. And even if that's the only accessory that you pose him with, that's a really awesome looking pose. Just having John Jay with his knife. And if you get him in the right pose, it is just kind of eerie how it doesn't look like a toy. It looks like a maquette or something, like a little sculpture, moving sculpture instead of like a toy meant for kids. Just an amazing amount of detail put into this figure, and even more impressive that it moves. It's not just a resin statue, but it's somewhat movable. And the last point of articulation that I haven't mentioned yet was he has got an ab crunch and a little bit of range. It's tight, and I never force joints that feel really tight. But again, cool that they gave a little bit of range there in his waist. And it doesn't look bad. Sometimes ab crunches on figures are really distracting, but I guess Rambo is so cut and shredded that a literal cut on a Rambo figure is really not that big a deal. It's not all that distracting. Same goes with the arms. I don't seem to notice that as much because he's got a cut there, like a muscular cut and another cut, and it just seems to all come together really nicely. Okay, let's talk accessories. It comes with a whole bunch of extra hands for both hands. So the ones I have in there right now are the left trigger finger and what I call the knife gripping hand. And the extra hands on the right side, he's got a trigger finger, so he can hold a gun in his right hand. Maybe this is the knife hand, and the one that I got in there is the bow hand, but that hand can grip everything just fine. And then over on the other side, he's got it's almost a thumbs up, because you got to have Rambo be able to do a thumbs up. But this is another, maybe this is the knife hand. He's got a bunch of knife hands. It's got a nice round grip there for the knife. And then a more open hand. Again, good for the bow and arrow. It comes with an assault rifle, which, let's pop that in his hand right now. It has a strap, so it's nice to be able to put the strap over top, just feed it through the head. And since it's a NECA figure, you want to be really careful, because these straps will just snap like nothing. Here we go. So that's actually a cool look too. Just having a gun slung over kind of harkens back to the gun belt that the Coleco Rambo had on the original figure, just having a black strap go across his chest. But let's pop this in his hand and see what he looks like holding a gun. Rambo is ambidextrous. He's just that good. It might actually be easier. That just popped off on its own, but it might be easier to pop the hand off. See, Rambo knows what he's doing, even if I don't. And just feed the finger to the trigger there, pop it back on. I like that these hands are so easy to pop on and off. With Hot Toys, there's always a risk of breaking a peg when you're removing them, and other movie style NECA figures. But I never feel like I'm going to break that peg. So you can have Rambo holding the gun, and one of the issues with the lack of mobility in his hands is he has a little bit of trouble holding both the gun and the bow and arrow with both hands. So you can do it, but it takes a little bit of work. So what we're going to do here is pull this hand off, but because it's such a pliable material, it's nice that you can just pull it open. There we go. And I don't have to worry about breaking it from bending it so much. Pop that wrist back on. Never actually done this with this figure, so I'm very interested to see what this looks like with a two-handed grip. It's it doesn't quite have the range to do this quite right. Yeah, it doesn't. Well, there we go. We got it. There's not much range. You can see his finger is kind of bending the wrong way, but it works. He's holding it with two hands, which will reduce recoil. Oh, I forgot to mention on the knife sheath, there is actually a little strap right here and a hole that you can close it up. Doesn't take much pressure, and it's nice that there's just a little strap there, another extra little detail. But the coolest, well, before we get to the coolest, we'll get to the smallest accessory. He also comes with a grenade. But yeah, you can just, I don't know, basically put it in his hand. Have him pull the pin and then just throw it. All right, on to the final and coolest, most iconic Rambo accessory, his bow and arrow. And this is a really, really beautiful set. It comes with 2 arrows with different tips. So one of them is the exploding tip that he uses to blow people up real good. Let's get a look at this. Nice detail. Look at that on the tip. And then the other one is a barbed ending, and it even has like the slightest, subtlest silver paint on the tip. That's an incredible amount of detail. And a look at the bow itself. It's actually got this string on it. It's almost a functional bow. Like there's a nice give in this, and lots of detail too. Nice little subtle silver brush wash on it. This is not the same material as the figure is made of, though. Same with the arrows. This is more of that really brittle feeling plastic, I think. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is put this bow gripping hand in here, and you're going to probably want to use a hairdryer to warm up these fingers, these hand pieces. Make it a lot easier to grip. So this bow, this part I believe goes on the top, and the reason I'm having his left hand grip the bow is because the bow isn't ambidextrous. There's this little groove in the top right here that the arrow rests on, I believe. I'm not an expert with this type of stuff, but it doesn't seem to have it on the other side. So I think that's the way it needs to go. And then for his arrow gripping hand, I like to use one of the trigger fingers, because it just seems to be the one that is able to grip the end of the arrow the best, or one of these little feather type things on the end. So there's a little groove, little teeny tiny groove. These details are so tiny they're hard to get on camera. That groove, that little C looking thing, is what you stick the string on. And this is not an 80s toy, I can tell you that. Things don't just fit nicely into place. There's a lot more. This is like a hot toy. This is like a 12-inch figure. So let's do that. So your best bet is actually to just stick the string, have the string in his hand, take the arrow, rest it on that groove, and just feed the arrow. Doesn't necessarily have to even be making contact with the string, as long as it's in the hand, the string is in the hand. This is one of the main reasons why I prefer old style toys over really movie accurate figures, because it would be awesome if he could do all of the cool poses, but you're kind of limited in what you can do. Usually when I display this guy, I don't even have him doing like an arrow firing pose. I just do this because it's all I can really do. Just feed the string into here and have him point it down underneath there. Kind of like that. He's at the ready. So that's a cool pose. Luckily, one of the few proper looking non-action figure type of poses he can do is one that actually looks really nice. I think with this particular pose with the arrow at the ready, I prefer him with the more stoic looking face that the original NECA Rambo figure came with. That's still pretty cool. And speaking of that original Rambo, here he is. We can see some of the differences between the two. Let's get rid of this rocket launcher for now. The San Diego Comic-Con version is just ever so slightly a little more pinkish or orange in terms of skin tone, and the original version has more of like a darker red look to him. The pants are pretty much identical. The sheath is the same pretty much. Biggest difference being the head, and the San Diego Comic-Con version has that snarl, and then the original one from First Blood Part 2 is more of a stoic look, and they both have like a dark red bandana. I guess because it's wet. It's brighter when it's dry, but this is the more wet version. So that is San Diego Comic-Con version with the original NECA, and then another comparison, it's the original Calico Force of Freedom Rambo, and it's interesting that they're both the same height. They're actually the same size. So that means that this guy actually does fit in Force of Freedom vehicles, like the 6x6 Defender. And in fact, he fits in the Defender as well as the Rambo helicopter, the Skyfire, the jet. He fits in all of them better than the actual original Coleco Force of Freedom figures did, because he's got more range in his hips. So you can stick him in there. The one thing you got to watch out is the sheath, but you can have him grip the wheel. He's got more range, so he can grip the machine gun a little bit better. And I actually like to display this Rambo in the 6x6 Defender. I think he's perfect. He's got the right expression for this thing. He's kicking butt. He sits in it perfectly. It's the perfect scale. It's actually perfectly designed for it. The only thing you got to watch is because he's sitting that way, it's making the rubber in his pants tuck in again, which if it stays like that for too long, then it's just going to want to stay like that permanently. And another thing he's compatible with is the backpacks from the original Coleco line. So on a lot of the Coleco figures, the straps were so tight that they would break. They weren't quite long enough. And if you put this thing on the NECA Rambo, there's no fear of stretching it too much and tearing or breaking these straps. It sits nice and loose, and you can activate the Flamethrower, which has lost a little bit of spring in its step. And one of the issues with the original Firepower Rambo was you could never get his hand quite up there to grip this handle on the Flamethrower, but because this guy has a lot more range, just got to get his bandana out of the way, he can easily reach up to wherever the handle might be and dole out some fiery justice to the forces of General Warhawk. And even though it takes a little bit of stretching, he is able to hold the rocket launcher that came with the original NECA Rambo, and it's really cool to be able to have a Rambo figure grip an RPG with two hands, because the original one was not able to. And I think this particular Rambo with his snarling face looks better with this RPG that came with the other Rambo. Just looks like he's ready to blow up a helicopter real good. And the final homage is that the San Diego Comic-Con version comes with a card that is very close, almost identical to the original Rambo. Here's a version with Le Français on the bottom, and here's the all English version, John J. Rambo, and they've actually retyped everything here. Born Bowie, Arizona. That's really cool that Rambo is from a place named after a knife. It's the same size. It's the same feel. It's a little floppy but shiny. Again, the artwork is just a little bit different, but it's pretty close. Force of Freedom logo. Everything is the same. And on the back, even though the San Diego Comic-Con version doesn't come with these accessories, they just included it too. They've recreated it. And it even says 1985 at the bottom there. All rights reserved. And it even says Coleco. So that is awesome. If you don't have one of these and you really like these old style Rambo trading cards, info cards, they're like file cards for G.I. Joes that you didn't have to cut out. That's a really cool little extra bonus for longtime fans that remember collecting these. So that's the 2015 San Diego Comic-Con exclusive Rambo figure. A really cool, modern, super detailed figure that's also a great homage to the original figure that came out 30 years before. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to share the video if you enjoyed it. Also feel free to leave a Rambo comment or memory below. Big thanks to the Patreon tribe as always. If you'd like to join the Patreon tribe, You can visit us at www.patreon.com/MichaelMercy. And to join the tribe, fire an arrow into subscribe.
See you around.